really cool.
So we are doing a special edition of the podcast, and we are joined by a very special guest. Us two amateurs, me and Rich, are being joined by a professional. I think we can call you that, given that your employer does a podcast and you appear on that podcast quite regularly. But a guy who has written a few articles about rugby in France, and has certainly outnumbered us on trips to France or number of venues visited. I think you, at the last count, you're on 25, and I think between Rich and I, between us, we're only on 21. So you smashed us out the park on that one. But so welcome, Elgan Alderman.
Hello, thank you for having me on. Yes, I'm the Roslam among the Rosbifs, as the family joke has always been when the Welshmen are in France.
Very nice. I'd never have thought of that. But yeah, talk to us about, kind of, before we dive into it and before we dive into the special, your kind of experiences in France, highlights. Have I got my facts right? You know, when have you been out there? That sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. So I started when I was 7 years old. We went on a family trip to watch Newport play in Cast. We were season ticket holders down at Rodney Parade in the pre-regional era. So we went out for a game at what was the Stade Pierre-Antoine, now the Stade Pierre Fabre, to watch Cast beat Newport 43-21 when they had Gregor Townsend, Jeremy Davidson, Hugo Mola in the team, and also Arnaud Costes, the dad of Paul, who's obviously doing such good things now for Toulouse. So that was the first one, and that was the solitary visit for many years until I went to the Stade de France for a Wales-France Six Nations game in 2015. And then that was the solitary second album until in 2019, two friends and I, Charles Richardson, who's a rugby reporter at The Telegraph, but I know him very well from pre-journalism at university, and then another friend of ours called Rhys Williams, who's a geography teacher, another lover of rugby. We decided, let's just plan a trip to go to France to do 4 games in 4 days, because the schedule, the geography just lends itself so well to these long weekend trips. And we did that first one in December 2019. We went to Biarritz, Béziers, Montpellier, and Montauban. And then COVID got in the way, obviously, and we finally went back in 2022. We did Carcassonne, Mont-de-Marsan, Cast, and Mazamet, the home of Thomas Ramos, a little lower league ground. Then 2023, we went a bit too far, and we did 2 weekends in a row where we did 7 games over 2 weekends for a slightly longer trip, where we did Agen, Bayonne at San Sebastian, and Anglet on the first weekend, and then Colomiers, Angoulême, La Rochelle, and Bassan d'Arcachon on the second weekend. And then this season just gone, earlier in the year, we did Albi, Bayonne at the home of rugby, the Stade Jean Daugé, Marmande, and the Bordeaux-Toulouse 31-28 cracker at the Matmut Atlantique, which I think last time I checked was the last game of 15s Antoine Dupont lost in the season, when it was his first game back after sevens, when he came on at fly half after 3 minutes. And so yeah, and as well as that, I was covering Wales at the Rugby World Cup, so I experienced Nice, Lyon, Nantes, Marseille as well, and on a night off, I popped down to Massy v Suresnes as well while I was in the Paris area. So yeah, that brought up my quarter century, and hopefully more to add in the next few years.
Bit of a local derby as well, isn't it? Massy v Suresnes in terms of national. So that's surely more atmosphere than any of the other games almost.
It was a belter, and there was Cameron Wokey's brother was playing for Suresnes, and he was a former Massy boy, so there was a bit of fun there as well. And there was, I can't remember who scored it, but there was a 50-meter drop goal. The match just had everything you'd want on an evening in Massy.
That's amazing. Well, I'm sure our listeners now realise quite how more qualified you are, or better qualified you are, to talk about Tours de France than we are almost. But certainly a kindred spirit in the this is just very easy to do a trip and smash in as much rugby action as niche as possible in a short space of time, because it is a brilliant place. So on to the kind of reason why we've got you on and why your expertise in touring France is required. we wanted to, it's something Rich and I have debated in the past as kind of with friends as well. What would a Lions tour to France look like? We are doing it now because we are entering a Lions season, with the Lions touring Australia in next summer. Australia are a bit rubbish at the moment. There's a bit of debate out there as to whether this is going to be the end of the Lions. Is it going to be the end of Australia as a touring destination? Is it going to be worth it? You know, after the debacle of the South Africa tour 4 years ago as well, which was distinctly lacking in atmosphere, I think we can say. We wanted to kind of present an alternative view of what would be a truly magical trip for players and fans to France, because it's a brilliant country to tour, and for the British fans, it would be very, very accessible. So we each come up with our own itinerary on some very set criteria. We've tried to follow. I actually looked back at 2017 as the kind of last real tour, and it was pretty much the same sort of structure of a kind of arrive. You've got the Saturday as your first tour game, Wednesday, Saturday, and that's a kind of mini test almost. You've got a midweek game before the first test in week 4, and then you've got a midweek game between the first and second test, followed by a clear week before the third test. So that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, 3 tests and 7 tour games.
Sounds about right.
So before we kind of debate the toss of this, Rich, I want you to set out your itinerary, giving me just the kind of bare details of the match number, the opponent, and the venue.
Okay, so my itinerary to save the Lions is first game is Lions v Italy at the San Siro. The second game is what they'll be called, I don't know yet, but it'll be a Paris Barbarians team made up of Racing and Stade that will take place at the Parc des Princes. Then Toulouse at Stadium Toulouse, La Rochelle at the Matmut Atlantique. Game 5 will be the winner of Pro Day 2 at a venue TBC, the home ground of that club. Game 6, Clermont-Auvergne at the Marcel Michelin. Game 7, the first test down in Marseille at the Stade Velodrome. The last tour match, Game 8, Perpignan at the Stade M. Giral. Game 9, second test match in Lyon. And the hopefully decided the last game of tour will be a third test at the Stade de France.
Okay. That's some interesting stuff. I'll go next, and we'll save the voice of reason, Elgan, till third. So mine is the first game is also a test against Italy, but I'm doing it at the Parc Olympique Lyonnais before they head to Clermont-Ferrand for a game against Clermont at Stade Marcel Michelin. The second Saturday fixture is Stade Toulousain at Stadium TFC, so the football stadium, Toulouse Metropole, whatever you want to call it. The Wednesday midweek game is at the Stade Jean Daugé, and they're going to play a Basque Country 15. The kind of Saturday before the test is the French Barbarians at the Stade Raoul Barrière in Béziers. The midweek game in the lead up to the first test is Stade Francais at the Parc des Princes. First test is at the Stade de France. You've then got a midweek game against UBB at Stade Chaban-Delmas. Second test at Matmut Atlantique. Third test at Stade Velodrome in Marseille. Elgan, your high-level itinerary, please.
Sure. There are definitely a few areas where I think I've got it wrong as well, which I'm more than happy to bring up as well. But I've tried to go for a geographical loop of the country. So starting in Paris with Racing at La Défense in an evening fixture. Week 2, a France A/emerging France at the Stade de la Beaujoire in Nantes, followed by a Saturday against La Rochelle at the Marcel de Flandre. Week 3, a midweek game against Southwest France at the Stade Jean Daugé, followed by a Saturday game against Toulouse at the Ernest Wallon. Then a Wednesday game against a Provence/Côte d'Azur Invitational 15 at the Stade Félix Mayol, and a first test in Marseille. Then the final midweek game against the French Barbarians in Lyon. Second test moving back up to Paris at the Stade de France, and then hopefully or possibly a series finale also at the Stade de France in the final Saturday.
So you've gone, correct me if I'm wrong, you've gone for 2 tests at the Stade de France.
I have. I've done that because firstly, obviously it's a great stadium, 80,000 seats, and I think if you only have the third test there, there's the fear that it goes there 2-0. So if you have 2 there, I think they'll both be good occasions. But I did toy with working your way back up from Marseille with that Lyon test, but I went with or even Lille at the Stade Pierre Mauroy, but I went with 2 at the Stade.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that we were planning on thrashing out was the test match venue. So you've kind of introed that debate pretty well. I had Stade de France first. So actually, I went on the Lions tour in 2017. And in terms of touring the country, it just about worked out to end and to start and end in Auckland, because you could kind of fly down the south, do the South Island. We got to Wellington on the Saturday morning of the second test, and then we worked our way back up to Auckland by Friday evening. And also the state, they've kind of a little bit limited in stadium. I know the Forsyth bars kind of come through, but Eden Park is just so much bigger than the others, certainly the ones down south. And that I couldn't work out. I think whereas France has an abundance of amazing stadiums, and I wanted that there kind of has to be one at Stade Velodrome. I think France play there so often, and I went for Matmut Atlantique because I think you need to give a test to the Southwest, basically, as the kind of. I know it's a tricky one to kind of say where the Southwest is, but Bordeaux is kind of definitely a part of that rugby heartland now, and has been historically. So I felt like that was needed. Rich, have you got any? So yours was Marseille, Lyon, and the Stade de France.
Yeah, I think my fear with the Stade de France last was the dead rubber factor, as Elgan said. But yeah, I don't feel quite as strongly about one of those tests being outside. I'd quite happily bookend either of those with two at the Velodrome or 2 at the Stade de France. I think most eyes through my itinerary, quite a lot of it is about getting people in grounds and being able to see it. So there's maybe a couple of slightly bigger houses rather than the real heartlands. But yeah, more than happy to bin off Lyon as great a city as it is.
I thought what was oh, sorry, Ken, I was just on the subject of attendances. When I was totting up the sort of capacities of the stadiums I'd chosen, thinking if you've got La Rochelle, Bayonne, Toulouse, and Toulon Stadium in a row, then would the capacities be too low? And yet on mine, even with them, you could average more than 40,000 people at each game, even though South Africa and New Zealand tours, the most recent ones, have only averaged 30 odd, and that's with Nice, the Matmut Atlantique, Lille, and the Parc des Princes all sitting in reserve, which could put it above 50,000 per match. So it says it just shows what the options are in France when you consider it that way.
Yeah. So I think I certainly tried to follow your idea of geographically getting it in sync or in order. I don't think I quite managed it because I couldn't quite work it out, but that certainly makes sense. I think we're all set on at least one at the Stade de France and one at the Velodrome. I guess, are we saying first test or second test at the Stade de France? I guess we can work out the order later, but where are we agreeing on the third test match venue?
I'm happy the Stade de France.
Yeah.
Pile them in.
So we're going. Well, we'll work it out later. So we now want to debate, which is the fun bit, really, the tour itinerary and the special. They are special fixtures because it will be the first time. Obviously, when France replaces Australia, there'll be chances for more fixtures and more great clubs to see the Lions. But I guess that first game, Rich, you and I went for Italy. I quite like the idea of the San Siro, I have to say. I went for Lyon on the basis that Parc Olympique Lyonnais is massive. It looked really cool for the Six Nations game against England. It's a little bit out of town. That's a bad thing, I'd say, for Lions fans or visitors. But I quite like the idea of kind of a British team and an Italian side kind of coming over the Alps and landing at the next biggest stadium that they could see, to kind of take on the British and Irish Lions.
No, I think my Italy at the San Siro is an absolute winner. I'm not going to lie. That's the one thing on my list that I think is just an absolute beauty. It's one of the most accessible cities in the world. I'm not just saying that because I was literally there yesterday, yeah. But so maybe there's a bit of a recency bias, but yeah, I think, I don't know, something, because before that fateful tour, the 2005 tour, they played Argentina in Cardiff, right? And they're playing Argentina in Dublin next year.
Japan in Murrayfield in 2021 as well.
Japan Murrayfield, and then 2013 there was there was a game in Hong Kong, wasn't there? Barbarians. Kong, yeah. So I think a slight kind of geographical detour is no bad thing. Very accessible, pretty cool. And if my research serves me correctly, there's been one game of rugby played there in the past. I think Italy played New Zealand once in Milan, although I might have just been lied to or dodgy research, but yeah, that's my reasoning. I think it's pretty fair.
I thought there was quite a lot of rugby at San Siro historically.
There might have been
cricket, maybe, as they are AC Milan, or originally AC Milan Cricket and Football Club.
That's Geneva.
And AC Milan, they've got a new kit out. Sorry, let's not get sidetracked on Italian football clubs. Elgan, your idea of racing at the Thunderdome to kick it off is obviously an enticing one. Are you happy with that being shifted, or that kind of idea being shifted to a midweek or later on in the tour? Are you happy with Italy at the San Siro as a starter?
Yeah, of course. I mean, my thinking was that it could equally have been, I think, similar to what Rich suggested, as sort of Paris 15 joining the two clubs. I mean, my thinking was that Racing and Stade were the two clubs that won the Bouclier the first few years. So you start with the clubs that sort of founded rugby in France, as it were, and then you start in Paris and end up in Paris after doing that lovely loop. And it could have been at the Parc des Princes as well, but no, by all means, I'll defer. We'll set off camp to the San Siro.
Excellent. So that was kind of, I guess, your perhaps slightly more journalistic approach was to look at the history and the story. I tried to recognize the history, which is why I think we all agreed they've got to play Stade Toulousain in Toulouse as a standalone fixture. That's kind of undeniable at some point. I then went for not a kind of Paris combined or Racing. I went for Stade Francais on the basis that they are the second most successful in terms of top 14 titles, or Boucliers. Parc des Princes obviously is kind of in the same region. It's a massive stadium. With a bit of Leicester bias in there, the home of a great British Stade Francais clash in the 2001 Heineken Cup final. But I do really like the idea of a Paris Barbarians at the Parc des Princes or the La Défense. But just to kind of follow off that chain of thought, that's why my French Barbarians game is at Béziers, because as the third most successful team. But we've kind of, well, yeah. Anyone want to kind of put their case forward for one of their slightly more different teams? Go on.
Yeah, so similar to what you were saying, Rob, about sort of nods to history, that's why I've gone for quite a few sort of invitational regional 15s, because when the All Blacks and the Springboks of yesteryear would stop off at France after their British tours, they would never play against club sides. They always played against like southeast of France, southwest of France, Provence, Côte d'Azur. I wouldn't be surprised if a club like Bayonne just thought, "Who cares if we beat New Zealand? We don't want to play them. I just want to beat Biarritz all the time." I wouldn't be. Maybe that's why. That's just me speculating. But that's why I went for. I mean, I called it Southwest France at Bayonne, but it could equally be a Côte Basque 15, which was suggested as well. And I went for the Provence Côte d'Azur Invitational 15 at the Mayol because that was the team that beat the All Blacks in 1990 at that stadium in Toulon. 1915 with two of the most ridiculous drop goals in history by Patrick Barthelemy. One of them was inside the 22 on the touchline. It's just the most ridiculous drop goal you'll ever see. And the other one was from about 45 meters out. So those were my nods to history, added to the French barbarians as well. So that's why I went for a few of those sort of regional select 15s and limited myself to just 3 club sides.
I mean,
I think.
Go on, Rich.
I was going to say, so I feel like the kind of Côte Basque Southwest France that you both angled towards, it felt initially like an absolute no-brainer. So I think I want it in there, but I would be intrigued to know in my head that the whole sort of Bayonne Biarritz rivalry, it was what would the willingness of some of these folks playing together be, and where would you play it if it was a combined game? Because there's surely a huge amount of pride at stake there. And is Camille Lopez going to run out at the Aguilera, and Imanol Haranourdiki's dad's going to run on like all those years ago and throw a couple of shots? So yeah, Elgan.
He very nearly signed for Biarritz before he signed for Bayonne. So I've got the answer to this, Rich. They're playing for the Basque national flag, which I think will. And there was a Basque national side that has played in the past, not since 2002, I don't think, but they would obviously play under the Basque flag and in the Basque colours. It's in my mind, it's got to be the Stade Jean Daugé. That's going to annoy some people, but it's a more modern stadium. It's nearer the town. It's a bigger stadium than the Aguilera currently is, I think, because you've got 2 ends of the Aguilera that are just empty. I was tempted to send it to the Anoeta, the Real Arena in San Sebastian, but I wanted to keep it in France. I also debated, Elgan, as you did, the kind of Southwest thing. I was going to put it into historical or kind of they're still legacy, knocking around the kind of regional departments. So I think that was going to be Nouvelle-Aquitaine. No, yes. And then Occitanie was going to be the other side for your kind of Côte d'Azur, Provence equivalent, maybe. But I found enough players that are Basque and or have Basque heritage to kind of make me think that there will be a team that is going to be good enough. So there's a few Argentinian internationals that are Basque heritage, which I found quite interesting.
I think you raised the prospect of whether or not where Bordeaux would fall, and what either the All Blacks or the Springboks did once play a Southwest France team in Bordeaux. So if they were a team called that, they would be, I don't think they'd be up in arms if it were played in Bordeaux. I think I've done a real disservice to Bordeaux. I really think they should be in. Currently, I haven't got them in anywhere, but either the Matmut Atlantique or a game against Bordeaux themselves, they probably should be in, and I think I probably got that wrong in my selections.
Yeah, I was struggling to squeeze.
Wanted them in there just generally, and I kind of fudged it with Stade Bordelais winning 7, I think, and CA Bagler winning 2, and I think that kind of nudged me up to 9 and put them at a decent amount of Bouclier wins. Sorry, Rich, go on.
No, I was going to say I was the same. Like I kind of was trying to work out a way. I think I'd shoehorned in La Rochelle at the Atlantique as a bit of a middle ground, given La Rochelle's recent European dominance, as kind of reward for that. And obviously we went to that game last season there, where they really turned out in force, and you wouldn't have known that they'd had to travel kind of 2 hours up the road. So yeah, I think the Matmut Atlantique has got to be in there at some point, just because it's really cool.
So I guess I think we've all got, or Rich, you might have done, No, have you got the French Barbarians there?
No, I haven't, but I'm very happy for that to be one of the sides.
So the French Barbarians, players that play in the top 14 are now eligible again. They kind of briefly became the second France team. They've played quite a lot of international games in the past. That feels to me like that should be the Saturday before the first test, 1 week out, in the same way that quite often play the emerging Springboks or New Zealand Maori or Australia A, I guess, the week before. I guess we need to kind of find a venue for that, which might geographically make sense, which is trickier. But yeah, again, I went for Raoul Barrière in Béziers. Béziers, lots of wins, and also it's a little bit of geographically kind of a little bit easier. There's direct flight from the UK. When I flew into Béziers, there was lots of Irish people, so I assume it's quite an easy one. They might get Béziers themselves might get taken over by a Irish consortium. I saw a rumor on that the other day. So by 2025 summer, there could be strong ties to the Irish. Anyone want to pitch their venue for the French Barbarians fixture?
Well, I had them in Lyon for that pre-second test final midweek one. On the way up from Marseille, you play French Barbarians in Lyon, and then you go up to Paris, was where I had them. And just as an aside, you mentioned that they have played international teams. They even played Wales in Cardiff at the start of this century in an autumn game, which was, I mean, obviously that just doesn't happen anymore. But Wales French Barbarians in Cardiff, and I was there for that, so that was was a fun one. And I always wondered what happened to these French Barbarians, but they do still cling on every now and again, don't they, with these random appearances? But yeah, I had them in Lyon on the way up.
I think they played England a few years back around that time, and they had a few South Africans playing. I was very confused by what was going on as a young lad. But then that does make sense. The kind of Lyon. Are you doing that at the football stadium?
Yeah.
Rich, any views on the French Barbarians?
I like Lyon. If we're omitting it from the test, I think it's a great city. It seems like a growing kind of rugby city. The stadium looked like it did a pretty phenomenal job during that last Six Nations game. So, in spite of all of the sort of the history around Béziers and what have you, I think I like it in Lyon.
And I guess so. We're all set on, I think, Toulouse the Saturday before. I think we're all to the second Saturday. I think we're all set on. I think the big debate for me was kind of which club sides do you put in there? Toulouse kind of has to happen, but I'd love them. I'd love the Lions to go to the Marcel Michelin, but do Clermont merit it? Do La Rochelle, you guys both had La Rochelle in there at different venues. Do they merit it based on more recent stuff? Yeah, I'm willing to kind of take suggestions on the other tour fixtures. I'm kind of set on has to be a French Barbarians, has to be Toulouse, but I'm willing to. I think we've kind of settled on a Southwest or a Basque country, haven't we?
I think so. Can you give us a rundown of where we're at? Because my notepad is looking pretty shambolic at the moment.
We are Italy at the San Siro. Second fixture up for grabs. Toulouse on the Saturday. Fourth fixture up for grabs. French Barbarians on the Saturday before the first test. Sixth fixture up for grabs. First test and the midweek test between tests is up for grabs as well, I think. So there's plenty. It kind of makes sense to do our Southwest and or Basque 15 the weekend, but the midweek before Toulouse, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm easy on that. I feel I like the Basque angle though. I think I don't know, but then are we omitting Bordeaux? What a quandary. To imagine the club owners scrapping hard for these fixtures.
I think it's possibly either Bordeaux at the Atlantique or La Rochelle at the Marcel de Flonge. And I think if you go just on, obviously, the fact that La Rochelle are 2 times European champions and the De Flandre is just such a great stadium and a slightly smaller one to watch rugby, or you have the historic element of Bordeaux and the fact it's a bigger stadium with 42,000 people possibly in there. I think it's one of them rather than both of them possibly.
I quite like as much as I mean, all our efforts thus far to get a ticket to the Marcel de Flandre have been utterly fruitless. So I quite like the idea of a few other people having to befall that fate for starters. But I also like the idea of this kind of trip reaching, I guess, as many sort of outposts as possible. So I think I quite like the idea of that feels like a real sort of tour game classic, doesn't it? Having to schlep up to La Rochelle on the coast and probably get turned over by some massive blokes. So
the kind of first cut of the midweek team just getting absolutely beasted by Will Skelton and Weenie Antonio and George Henri Colombe and the like. So second fixture, we're doing La Rochelle at Marcel de Flandre.
Happy with that.
Then the Saturday, we've got to go to Toulouse, I think. But then we're going to have to jag back to Bayonne for midweek.
I think let's not worry too much about the travel practicalities. Let's not get in the way of a magical tour.
Okay. So Basque Country.
The trains are excellent in France anyway.
Yeah.
So it'll be fine.
Yeah. And no doubt, what's the bar in Bayonne, Rich? The
Chai Ramina.
Chai Ramina. That's open midweek, so that needs to be, we've got that one sorted. Then we go to French Barbarians in Lyon. So we've got to find a midweek fixture before the first test and a midweek fixture after the first test. We've only got two club sides in there. I really like the history of the Provence Côte d'Azur invitational 15.
And I feel
I think just having the mile so close to Marseille as well, it's just you've got them next to each other wherever that Marseille test goes.
Yeah. So that means we can go from Lyon back down south to Toulon for the Provence Côte d'Azur invitational team. I quite like the idea that one of the midweek towns is just a bit crap as well. Like, the less experienced people in French rugby kind of thinking, oh, I want to go to Toulon, and then kind of getting and good stadium, but not much else. They're then playing the first test in the Stade Velodrome. So we've got one more midweek game before the Stade de France, which seems like it kind of has to be either Stade Francais or the Paris Barbarians at either the Parc des Princes or the La Défense Arena. Rich, I'm afraid your shout of Pro Day 2 winner has kind of fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, it has a bit. It was always a bit of a long shot, but I quite like the idea that maybe one of those sides that has historically been, a powerhouse might have the additional carrot. So you might end up playing a Argennes or a Béziers. And also just to add another fixture to the 48 that they already play in Pro Day 2, but I'm happy to concede on that one.
So, are we doing Paris Barbarians to keep everyone happy in the capital? And where are we playing it? It feels like Parc des Princes to me.
I think so, to honour the 24-year stint France had there before the Stade de France was built.
Yeah, I like it.
Paris Barbarian side could be quite tasty, couldn't it? So cut from current side.
With a jersey that's half sort of Stade Francais pink and half Racing blue and white.
100%. Yeah,
my UBB fixture was going to be a real throwback to the original CA Bagler and Stade Bordelais colours. So that was going to be a half and half kit, just to kind of throw back to the heritage. What do the Côte d'Azur Provence Invitational 15 play in?
I'll send the link to the video with you. It's a sort of yellow-red number with a bit of
Ooh.
blue on there. I'll send you
That's
the link.
that's the kind of flag of that area, isn't it?
Hmm.
Definitely seen that. So in summary, we have the Lions next summer, 10-game tour. It's kicking off against Italy at the San Siro. Then they play La Rochelle at the Stade Marcel de Flandre. They play Stade Toulousain at the Toulouse Metropole Stadium. They then go down to Stade Jean Daugé in Bayonne to play a Basque Country 15 before they play the French Barbarians at the Olympique Lyonnais Stadium in Lyon. They play the Provence Côte d'Azur Invitational 15 in Toulon in a midweek game before the first test at the Stade Velodrome in Marseille, before everyone shoots up to Paris for the Paris Barbarians midweek game against the Paris Barbarians at the Parc des Princes, and then 2 tests at the Stade de France for everyone to enjoy a titanic battle between British and Irish Lions and the mighty Les Bleus. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Any last minute changes?
Now book the flights or the trains, book the trains.
Trains, yeah. So we have that fantastic itinerary. I guess all that's left to say is thank you, Elgan, for your time and your insight and your walking us through the history of French rugby and historical invitational 15s and all sorts of random facts that I kind of didn't even begin to imagine I might learn. I had on Saturday, I kind of while our team was batting and I was meant to be watching them and supporting them, I was kind of squirreling away on Wikipedia for various French rugby facts. But you've absolutely outdone us there, I think, with some brilliant history. I guess next thing is where's next on your own personal tours around France? Have you got any lined up?
We've started early stage discussions for where we'd go this year. We've got one possible date before Christmas, but we're not sure about that because I've got a wedding before Christmas as well, which might have to take precedence on matters financial and logistical. But at the very least, I'm sure we'll be back in our usual, perhaps March, April, Easter slot with one of our party being a teacher. So yeah, looking forward, hopefully, to do another 4, possibly 5, or possibly the holy grail of 6 games in a weekend, which can be done if the geography lines up. You can do 2 on a Saturday and 2 on a Sunday if it works.
Sensational stuff. That's the mind boggles. And are you likely to get out there for work at all, or is that kind of off limits? Do you get to kind of follow some of the Welsh sides maybe in Europe or?
I mean, it's not off limits, but I will be. I've been in Paris and Marseille for the Olympics this summer, and I'll be back in Paris for the Paralympics in the next few weeks. So I will be in France, albeit not covering rugby. But yeah, it's never off the cards, but it does tend to be a busman's holiday rather than work.
Brilliant. Rich, you want to add anything?
No, just intrigued as to the 6 in 3 days or whatever it is. Like that's mind blowing.
That's Rich's morning gone tomorrow.
It feels like a real Rubik's cube trying to work out those fixtures. Enjoy. We'll keep a keen eye out to see where those fixtures lie.
And we should say thank you to look out for Elgan stuff, obviously in the Times. Those of you lucky enough to have a subscription, there is some excellent writing on not just rugby. There was some stuff on the Olympics. I think I saw the other day, plenty of stuff on cricket as well, which keeps me interested. But yeah, a brilliant writer, fantastic insight this evening. Thank you very much, Elgan, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That's very kind. Thank you for having me.